Bel's sword sang out, past one of Arthur's spearmen and into the face of a Saxon. As the man fell back screaming, bloodied, the druid drew back, found a second target, and dodging a clumsy blow from an attacker, repeated his first maneuver. Again his borrowed blade pierced skin and bone and removed a hated Saxon from the fight before he stepped back, ready to defend himself against more attacks. The battle had begun well for the Britons as the opposing shield walls lined up, spears bristling on opposite sides of the field. It had been plain, even from a distance, that many of the invaders had little stomach for this fight. Merlin and Bellicus' magical performance had sown the seeds of doubt in superstitious Saxon minds, and the presence of Arthur's heavy cavalry added to the fear that Bel could almost feel radiating from the disheartened men facing them. Merlin had taken to the field again, dancing and singing like a wild man, his eyes showing almost completely white as he capered before the Saxon army, who had no mystics of their own left to counter the druid's spells. He had ended his weird performance by pointing at the commander, Fleming, and prophesied his death before the sun reached its zenith that day. Bel watched in grim satisfaction as the warriors closest to the Saxon leader moved unconsciously away from the Jarl, leaving him somewhat isolated, face a mask of uncertainty. To his credit, Fleming was brave enough to immediately order his men to move forward, or perhaps he simply wanted them to hide his fear. Either way, the army began to move across the field. Fleming came from a long line of Saxon soldiers, and he employed the same tactics his forebears had used successfully for years, which essentially meant a shield wall with a few slingers amongst them, who sought to decimate their opponents before the close combat could begin. Bellicus suspected the commander had noticed the Britons' cavalry had disappeared from sight, but whether he had or not, Fleming simply didn't have the tactical experience to do anything about it. The one provision he seemed to have made for Arthur's horses was a small number of spearmen who hung back at the edge of the Saxon force, no doubt to frighten away any cavalry charge. Both sides spent their missiles, slingshots and arrows, neither of which made any impression thanks to the weighty shields carried by the warriors. And then Arthur's men waited for the clash as the Saxon soldiers came forward. Bellicus, in his own brown robe once more, stood behind the first few ranks of the shield wall. But even so, he was buffeted back by the almighty coming together of the opposing warriors. The air was split by the deafening sounds of war cries, screams of pain and horror, and grunts of exertion as desperate men sought to slaughter anyone on the other side. The Saxons had more men in their shield wall, yet the fight was evenly matched at first, thanks to the lingering fear at the bad omens the invaders had witnessed in the pre-battle rituals. Soon enough, though, the superior numbers began to tell, and it seemed the wider Saxon line would curve around the flanks of the Britons' shield wall. And that would spell disaster, Bel thought, as he leaned forward and thrust the tip of his sword through a gap in the shields. He couldn't see where it ended up, but he was rewarded with a cry of agony, and when he pulled it back, it was coated with fresh blood, a handspan along the blade's sharp steel. He sensed something different then, although it took him a moment to understand what it was. The Saxons were too lost in their impending triumph to react to the rumbling that Bel could feel stronger with every passing moment. "Brace yourselves!" Bellicus roared as the trembling ground was joined by the thunder of pounding hooves, which he could hear now even over the sounds of battle. His great height allowed him to witness the initial impact as Arthur's heavy horsemen, spears held low, slammed into the back of the Saxon army. Nothing changed in the fighting closest to him, and the cavalry rode away a short distance, regrouped, then charged again. This time, the shockwave was felt by the front ranks of the Saxon shield wall, who knew now their comrades were dying behind them as well as in front of them. The confusion spread at a startling rate throughout the army, and buoyed by the turn of the battle's tide, the Britons threw themselves into the fight with renewed vigour.